Right, here we are. I'm just smiling because I kind of think it's kind of appropriate that I'm writing a bit of a thriller and I look like somebody who's sitting half in the dark. But anyway, the evening is drawing in here, as they say, and we're going to do episode 6 of the Astrakhan's Feather, which is a book I've told you before, if you're following this story, that I really love. I really do love it. And anyway, let's hope you like it a bit too. So I'm just because I haven't done it for a while, I'm going to introduce you to a new character, Holly Dreyfus. Now, Holly Dreyfus is based on she's a journalist, she's an editor, she's a young girl. She's based on somebody I know and somebody I worked with. It's another character, though, that when it went to the book agent, one of the world's best, they came back to me and said that they didn't think that she was like a real character. Maybe I just didn't explain it well. I don't know. You be the judge. You be the judge. Anyway, here we go. Holly Dreyfus sat in semi-darkness, blinds half-shuttered, slices of bright morning light spilling onto the dark wood floor where they shivered like water in the breeze from the open door, half-open door. Is that too much? I don't think so. I think it's painting a picture, I would hope. Anyway, Holly frowned. She didn't much like sunlight. It didn't suit her complexion. Her father had once described with a grin as smooth as creamy cream. The green IBM Selectric hummed in front of her. A sheet of paper in the platen quivered as it waited for the silver Courier golf ball to whir and roll before stamping hard all over its white virginity. I know, if you're below the age of about 40, I don't think you'll have much of an idea what I'm talking about. The IBM Selectric was an electric typewriter, or semi-electric, right? It was the first of its kind. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant piece of machinery. And it had this like golf ball, they actually called it that. And it whirred around, when you typed, it whirred around and found the letter and stamped it on the paper there. Brilliant thing, always humming away there you go. Like all the best newspaper offices, the journalist's desks were right out front, the scribes ready to welcome all who would come in and stand at the counter to tell their tales of horror, daring, conspiracy, fraud, lost dogs and cats, births and deaths and marriages and golden weddings, all of which would end up that week in the pages of The Record, Bone Mountain's newspaper since 1822. But only Holly sat there this Monday morning, and she was sitting not at her own desk, but at her father's. The Selectric had been his since 1966, when it first came out of the box, and had been working pretty much every day since. Holly paused her thoughts and swallowed. The Selectric is his, and one day he will walk through that door large as life, and smile and say as always, "So, Hol, what's the story?" It had been 6 months since Armand Dreyfus, another character, Holly's dad, editor and owner of the Record, at last sat at this mahogany desk, pounding out the week's front page story, the Selectric humming and hammering as always. The piece, in this particular case, was a report on the council's planning committee into expansion of the sewage system. May not sound like much. Stick with it though, it's important. And the impact it might have on the mountain. She wondered about it, of course. Could that have been the reason her father had disappeared without a word? But it was hardly contentious. And months back, she'd soon dismissed it as a reason for his disappearance. It just didn't seem important enough. Of course, she knew the rumours. He'd run off with another woman. It made her laugh because her mother had died when she was 5, a road accident in the wet, so he hardly had a woman to run from. Then there was talk about him knocking up debts, but that wasn't true either. The Record was not a free newspaper. It did rely on advertising revenue, but sales were strong because, unlike most free newspapers, the ones that sat discarded and soggy on the verge outside most homes on a Thursday morning and got run over and flattened and pulped, the Record cost money to read, which gave it some value. This is true. I'll bring this up because, of course, many of these things I've seen. We used to do a newspaper in the Hawkesbury, right? I worked on the Hawkesbury Gazette, and I'm talking about 12 years or so ago. And those were the big days, local papers. We had 6 full-time journalists, one of whom was just doing sport. We had a sub-editor as well, and an editor, and a full-time photographer. Now the paper no longer exists. But anyway, the interesting thing is they'd also bought a rival newspaper many years ago, called the Courier. the Hawkesbury Courier, right? And so the Courier was a bit of well, every week we came to do the Hawkesbury Gazette, right? You know, it was a labour of love, and it was 60 pages most weeks, right? It's massive. I mean, these days you're looking at 12, 16, 20 pages, you know, really, in a decent local newspaper. Quite sad anyway. And so what used to happen is the Courier was a pain because we had to fill it every week. So the editor, Peter, he features as a character in this, actually, called Trunk. You'll see him later. He was really funny. I could do a whole podcast on him and a whole bloody video on Peter, actually, and I really should do. But the point is that what he would do is, if you got some sort of, like, you know, media release story, he would go Courier that shit. Right? It wouldn't be going in the proper newspaper, it'd be going in the Courier. And they used to chuck it out as a free. This was a free one. And the Hawkesbury Gazette, you had to pay money for it. I don't know what it was, about $1.60 or something, right? Anyway, the Courier was free, and they used to chuck it out. They had somebody delivering it. Anyway, it used to literally gather at the bottom of my drive, and I used to drive over it in the car, and then it'd get wet and it'd get soggy. It was like a speed bump, right? As you came up your driveway, they just sat there for ages until it rotted away. Anyway, I wildly digress. But anyway, let's talk about the Record and Holly Dreyfus, right? The Record cost money to read, which gave it some value. And thanks to the interesting and lively content, Holly had to sometimes remind herself that sewage systems really were of interest to Bone Mountain residents on account of the fact they'd been lobbying the council for a decade. This is true as well. Hang on. It had... I've got to move down page, but yeah, it had... All right. Sorry, folks. I've just gone... Just bear with me. I just went back the wrong way. Been doing anything interesting today? We'll be there in a sec. Sorry about this. Here we go. Oh, it's interesting going back through all this. Oh dear. Sorry about this. I went back to the beginning. Shouldn't have done it. Holly Dreyfus. Yep. Always fancied Holly Dreyfus. Always did. The real one. Shouldn't say that, but anyway. I'll tell you an interesting story while I'm going through this. So, at work, we're looking at new offices, right? We've got to move out the one we're in January. And I haven't been there long, as you know. I've been there 2 months. And I won't go into that at all. But anyway, I've been there 2 months, hopefully not too much longer. But we're looking at new offices. So me and the CEO, get this as well. So the CEO is the owner's son. Got there on merit, did he? Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, he's all right. So we were looking at offices, and we were with this real estate agent, right, Erin. And she's young, you know, she's young enough to be my granddaughter. And she's very attractive blonde girl. And the funny thing is with it, so, oh crikey, I could go off track again here, but I'm not going to stick with it. So we went and looked at this one office, right? And as I say, I'm not familiar with the town really yet, not that familiar. And the boss is there, and we're looking at this house, and it's used as a business at the moment. It's a place that we are going to move into in January. Anyway, I'm standing next to her. We're leaning against some kitchen counter or something, you know. I'm standing right next to her, and I'm thinking that is Chanel Mademoiselle. That's the perfume she's got on. I'm a connoisseur of these sorts of things. Anyway, that's another story. But I'm standing next to her, and the boss, he's looking around. He's looking at the ceiling and all that sort of stuff. He's just a little way off from us, you know. And she said, oh, there are a few other people, you know, looking at this, other businesses looking at it. And he said, oh, yeah, like who? And then she looks at me and whispers. I thought she whispered. It probably wasn't. She said, I'm a little cutie. And I thought, what the hell? I thought, yeah, you are. You are. There's no two ways. I was about to say something because the boss is a bit distracted. And then he goes, oh, you mean that toy business up in the town? Oh, my God. Thank God I didn't say anything. Can you believe that? If I'd have said to her, yes, I know you are, I mean, that would have gone downhill faster than a truck without brakes, wouldn't it? Oh, dear. Anyway, that was my day. Let's get back to the business in hand here, folks. Sorry about this. Okay, Holly Dreyfus, here she is, and on all this stuff. Armand Dreyfus, he's missing, right? And he was writing a story, she reckons, about some sewage system, but anyway. And there are all these rumours, and... oh, dear, okay. All right. The Record was also fiercely independent, never pulled any punches. Like any proper newspaper, it investigated and reported the facts honestly, without fear or favour. It was a real paper with a proud heritage. I think that's important. But Holly wished she'd paid more attention. Sorry, God almighty, technology, where are you? Right. But Holly wished she'd paid more attention when her father had left that Wednesday afternoon. She remembered the weather better than anything else. The sky clear, air crisp. Beginning of autumn, the best time of year in her opinion. Still warm enough, but not yuckily humid and sticky like it was now. Holly sighed. She didn't much care for summer at all. It was too hot, and that made it hard to think. As she liked to remind herself, and any sun worshipper who'd listen, it was a scientific fact that over 35 degrees centigrade, the human brain simply didn't function properly. On that bright spring morning when Armand had said, just popping out for an hour or two, Holes, see you at dinner, Holly didn't think twice. At the time, she'd been immersed in writing a news story about two bank robbers who seemed to be on a tour of the region, so she barely looked up. See you later. But she hadn't. His car hadn't been found. No one had heard from him, and all of a sudden Holly was editor of her father's newspaper. Not that she couldn't do the job. After all, she'd been his deputy for pretty much as long as she could remember. When she was 11, she presented Armand with her first serious piece of journalism, a short story on the scandal surrounding, this is true, the headmaster of Holly's primary school, a man who it was said by doting parents had get up and go. On school mornings, Mr. Schuyler would personally greet parents dropping their young ones off. Coffee in hand, suit always impeccable, tie knotted just so. His church's handmade chestnut brogues gleaming like conkers. There was no doubt Timothy Randolph Schuyler was a dapper dresser, a consummate public relations expert, and apparently a very gifted headmaster. But when he spotted Ophelia Krause, or OK, Ophelia Krause, as the bigger school kids would soon maliciously dub her, it all seemed to go very badly wrong indeed. Long legs, long natural blonde hair, a smile to make any grown man whimper. The student teacher came into school like a breath of heady jasmine. Timothy Schuyler was stricken. Thing was, she was a student teacher and Tim was already well married. As she lined the kindy kids up for their first assembly, he could barely take his eyes off those long, lightly tanned legs. He must have interviewed her once, but he wondered if he had, how he could have missed those fantastic pins. That morning he had trouble getting his school news out at assembly. His mind was elsewhere. Truth to be told, it was already in bed with Ophelia Krause along with the rest of him. Soon the parents were talking, especially the fat mothers with badly cut dyed hair and coarse-lined leathered faces. The result, unkind souls said, had been left out in the sun for too long. Known maliciously by many as the Coven, they kept tight control over the organisation of all school events, canteens, spring and summer fairs, bus excursions to the animal park, the Christmas concert. Any morning they could be seen huddled together, whispering, hands half covering their mouths, maybe in case Schuyler had suddenly learned to lip read. The Coven had names like Cheryl, Lynette, Trace, Natasha, Rioni and Booty. They got together in the dark back corners of Bone Mountain cafes to hiss and chat. Wednesdays they'd meet at each other's houses to gossip and discuss their predictable lives. Corpulent, evil-smelling, mud-spattered SUVs abandoned outside, horse boxes still attached, some of the beasts snorting and kicking the alu panels. The Coven drank instant coffee. The fattest ones gulped juice as if that would help. After 1 p.m. they'd guzzle shardy or red wine if it was winter. On Fridays they took their crazed, leaping, uncontrollable dogs to the Eastern Fire Trails, set them loose while they stood around and talked and cursed and wailed about people and laughed like drains and talked of bitch-slapping, cruising, bin wasted, tanked, fucked up and rootin'. The Coven's husbands, Bronk, Keith, Tully, Rake, Banjo, and Sly, were thick-necked bogans with tats who sucked on cheap, saggy Winston Greys and even winter-time wore wife-beaters, khaki stubbies, and flip-flops. They had Southern Cross T-shirts with "Fuck off, we're full." They drove chattering, clattering utes with cages on the back and mud and stickers. "I'm not sorry. We grew here. You flew here. Ethnic cleansing unit. Have a root in a butte. It's butte." I've seen all those stickers. Along with pumped-up suspension, fat tyres with knobby block tread, rusty roof spotlights for roo and wild boar hunting, gun racks, rod carriers, whippy aerials, snorkel exhausts. In the back, the bolted cages of industrial steel kept the dogs tight, almost wild animals. They'd chase down a feral boar or kangaroo soon as you let them loose. The Bogues, who had sons, let their youngsters loose on unlicensed and plated trail bikes by the time they were 5 and fuck them if they fell off. Get up and suck it up, boy, and toughen the shit up. They had girls they didn't much care, but you better keep away from her and don't even look, buddy. You know what's good for you. It's all true. They trained grounds out at Saracen Copse, live baiting with 2-day-old piglets, small lost dogs, possums and their babies. They worked at the maximum security prison set deep in the bush the other side of Richmond, known as the Haze, or simply H, because when the blue gum surrounding it got summer hot, they smoked blue vapour that made you cough and make your eyes water. On weekends, the Bogues worked their industrial-scale marijuana plantings on the eastern slopes of the mountain, known locally as Dark Side of the Bone, or Darky as they called it in code, on account it wasn't easily visible except from the air, and then only if you look real careful. Despite the tats and bogan behaviour, or maybe because of it, they'd run a hugely successful international drug operation for decades. A bunch of Mexicans who stood out like sore thumbs in snake-tooled boots and fancy belts had arrived once, stepping off the train, looking around, tracking snuff back from Cuyahoga and keen to take it over. The Bogues, clinking long nets of goat, VB and the bloke, laughed about how well the plants grew, what with the fertiliser. Only one fancy boot was ever found by a rambler and eventually logged as unsolved, no case pending by the cops. The Coven knew a bit about the business, as they like to call it, but like wives everywhere who choose to ignore the husband shagging the daughter or au pair, they kept quiet, content to enjoy the expensive perfumes and jewellery, as well as Bali, where they owned several beachside and hinterland properties. They vacationed on the island for a month every year, lived like royalty among the fragrant sea breezes and gentle, smiling Balinese who hated them. Within a month of Ophelia Krause's arrival, many of the mothers, and not just the Coven, were passing by the school in the early evenings. Bone Mountain often called for an evening drive with the windows down, cool air flowing through, especially if you were a mother with an unemployed husband at home who was handy with his fists until he collapsed into a drunken stupor. There were plenty of those injured men who'd never left the area and carried all the generational history, spite and disappointment on them like festering sores. Skylar's sky blue BMW with the M suspension and shark's nose grille sat within kissing distance of Ophelia's shiny red Mazda. Yes, they would report back, the cars are still there. A few weeks later, the leggy student teacher moved in with Skylar and his wife, an unhappy-looking imperious woman called Prue, who favoured tight-ass twin sets and looked older than her years thanks to her prematurely greyed hair and constant lemon-sucking frown. Not a few of the mothers would have given their firstborn to be a fly on the wall in that household. One mum, who could spread rumours swifter than mosquito repellent, told the others with a deliciousness usually reserved for mention of her almond and pecan tart. "Breakfast must be especially interesting, ladies." They all cackled and thought, "Oh, you fucking bitch." The scandal grew, taking on a soap opera life of its own, complete with whispered sightings of the couple. Sorry, I'll say it again. The scandal grew, taking on a soap opera life of its own, complete with regular whispered sightings of the couple, and it was rumoured, sometimes even the three of them, at local bars, where more often than not they were said to be worse for wear and drinking tequilas encrusted with salt and sucking, you hear what I'm saying, ladies, sucking, lime, and even to the long whispering grasses outside Saracen Copse, where it was said not only the grass moved. The offices of Bone Mountain estate agent Miles Blanchett, he of the gleamingly expensive dentistry and convertible canary yellow Maserati Quattroporte, was said to have visited with the big bear of a man himself, tasked with scouring the district, searching for a suitable house for the newly extended family. "Outdoor jacuzzi, a must, ladies," said the coven. The coven nodded knowingly, and one hissed, "The student is with child." But the crunch came, and 11-year-old Holly's story was born on annual school summer camp, where Timothy Schuyler was seen by more than a few young students cuddling okay, and more outrageously later rolling around on the grass with her, laughing, giggling, the two of them kissing passionately. "And tongues were involved," said one year 6 student to a couple of year 4s, who went, "Yuck." The students had stood in a row on the banking above and laughed quietly because Mr. Schuyler was so funny rolling around like that, but the laughter faded as one hand unfastened her blouse and fiddled inside with an urgency normally only reserved for grabbing your passport and credit cards from inside the leather poof when a bushfire's embers are in your roof. Schuyler put both hands in and came out with a large breast which he held like a puppy, before placing his mouth on it, kissing and sucking like a man possessed, which he probably was by then, and oblivious to anything else going on around him. It was rumoured a picture had been taken by a 4th former, and as the crowd grew, 5th and 6th formers, some of whom were no strangers to sex even at their tender age, told their teachers. The scandal deepened when parents got to hear. The real problem for Schuyler, though, was Holly Dreyfus. She had her notebook and small pocket camera out as he was rolling around enjoying himself. When Holly presented Armand with a typed story on her return from camp, he'd frowned as he'd read it, quickly, deftly making marks in the margin, dashing off changes, scribbling small alterations, the ever-present Parker duofold marble green fountain pen with the red ink that flowed swift and glorious as fresh cut blood scratching across paper, bow tie quivering with what Holly could only hope was excitement. "Ah," he'd eventually said to his daughter, who stood wringing her hands nervously. "Now you are a journalist, my girl." She felt like she'd won the Pulitzer. Armand ran the story as a front-page lead with Holly's byline, and pointed to a piece following 2 pages later, a hard-hitting editorial about responsibilities, teaching children right from wrong, and above all not shagging your student teacher in front of kids, though he didn't quite put it that way, Holly remembered. Schuyler was furious. He suspended Holly the very next day and called Armand on the phone, threatening the Record with legal action. Armand leaned back and laughed. Far as he was concerned, if there were any less than 2 writs landing on the office doormat every week, he really wasn't doing his job. 2 days later, the education department stepped in and quietly removed Schuyler, leaving only a small damp patch where his BMW's aircon had wept a little each day. Ophelia was transferred to an outback school with 6 pupils out west, where it was dusty and never rained. Calm once more returned to the community. The coven went back to organising fun-making cake stalls for term 2 and planning their next barley trip, and the school got a new head, a confused old man everyone soon called Grandpa. That's true as well. That is true. Sitting in the semi-shuttered gloom, remembering the excitement of that first real story, every moment still fresh in her mind, even 15 years later, you can do the maths, the thrill of seeing those words in print, her byline in solid 12-point type, Holly felt crushed that the father who had encouraged her, the dad who had brought her up, the man who had taught her about life, ethics, morals, and above all newspapers, the parent she loved, was nowhere to be found. She'd reported the disappearance to Christ himself, but now the inspector was gone too, and that was a bit of a mystery in itself, which she would have to investigate further. The point was, as Christ pointed out, albeit kindly, Armand was an adult, and he could go where he pleased. But Holly had known something was very wrong. She glanced, not for the first time, at the small myrtle bin of pens on the desktop where the duofold gleamed. There was no way Armand Dreyfus was going anywhere permanent without his marble green Parker duofold with the blood red ink. I've got one of them. It's got blood red ink in. She sighed. There were more pressing problems. She still didn't have a front page lead for this week's issue. The record had to go to press tomorrow midday at the very latest. Suddenly Holly wrinkled her button nose. She sniffed. She could smell something rotten approaching. When the door opened, she realised it was curdled milk. Got a scoop for you, darling. Holly smiled because sometimes, just now and again, Johnny Trot the milkman delivered more than just a couple of gold tops, rather too close to their use-by date. And that's where we'll leave it there. And you see the dark has descended as we've been talking. Anyway, look, you know what? I haven't read that for a few years. And I love it. I do like it. I do like it. It took me a while to do it, I guess. I don't know. But maybe it didn't. But I love it. I love it. I think it's a great bit of writing, frankly. You know, I'm being a bit American there, I know. Blowing my own trumpet. Anyway, here we go. I'm going now, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. All right. I hope you enjoy it. And if I can get the mouse to behave itself, we'll be finishing.